So some years ago, I work in technology, and I was asked to present at a conference in Sydney, Australia. And I was living in Los Angeles at the time, but had spent my youth in the United Kingdom, in the north of England. So after I'd moved to the United States, I used to fly back to England to see my family a couple of times a year, and I always used to go with Air New Zealand because I found them to be one of the best airlines. So when I had the opportunity to go to Sydney, I found that I could get to Sydney by flying with Air New Zealand. So that's what I did. And that trip goes from Los Angeles to Auckland in New Zealand, and then from Auckland to Sydney. So I decided to stay for one day in New Zealand. So take the aircraft the following day. And I was recommended to go and see a little island off Auckland, New Zealand, which is called Waiheke Island. And as I stepped off the ferry, something happened to me. I felt like I'd gone through some sort of a portal. As I stepped off the ferry, like I'd entered a different world. But not only that I'd entered a different world, but I'd come home, and I stayed there for a few hours and then went back and then carried on to Sydney. A couple of years later, I realised that I wanted to live in New Zealand on Waiheke Island. And as I worked in technology, I had a lot of flexibility about what. As I stepped off the ferry, full place, and at that time when I went, it wasn't very well known. Anyway, the point I want to get to, which is the main point here, this is when I started to get more of an interest in permaculture. I'd read a book before I left to live in the United States, about a very early book on permaculture. It wasn't Bill Mollison. Anyway, what happened whilst I was on the island, I think these things happen to us in life with a purpose, is New Zealand entered the most severe drought in recorded memory. Very early book on permaculture. It wasn't Bill Mollison. The island has no reticulation, and what that means is it has no mains water and no sewage systems. Mains sewage systems. That latter piece isn't that relevant because it's obviously septic systems are fairly normal in many places, but there was no water coming from anywhere except the skies. Pretty much everybody had rainwater tanks. I often say this: we all should have rainwater tanks if we live in a place that has precipitation, and if we don't, we shouldn't really be living there. That's an aside. So anyway, this drought here, very early book on permaculture, that every single thing we depend on, wherever we are, is finite. I had rainwater tanks, and because it was only myself, I actually lasted through the drought. I was okay, but a lot of people didn't, particularly people with families. They were able to get water from 2 or 3 companies on the island that had wells, but it was incredibly expensive to get water, and the waiting time eventually reached 8 weeks. So you would order your water, and you get it 8 weeks later. Now, of course, there was a supermarket on the island. I mean, this island has about 9,000 people in winter. There's a supermarket on the island, but the supermarket pretty quickly ran out of bottled water. And because it was only myself, I actually lasted through the drought. I was water because they had rainwater. Again, another indication of finite situations. At another time, there was a fire at that supermarket, and it destroyed a lot of the supermarket, most of it, in fact. So all of a sudden we have food shortages because everybody's relying on the food on the shelves in the supermarket, which is ridiculous because it was a fairly fertile island. But anyway, this is what it is, isn't it? This is what we do in life. We rely on what's available on the shelves in the supermarket, which is ridiculous because it was shortly after that I came back to the United States, and that's when I became a permaculture certified designer. So that experience on Waiheke Island in that 3-year period, I'm going to re-emphasize this, taught me that everything is finite, everything. And just to, I should have mentioned this before, I'm living in Eugene, Oregon at the moment, which is a fairly fertile and well-watered place in the Pacific Northwest of the United States. But here's the thing, and this is something I became aware of fairly early on when I moved here. On the shelves in the supermarket, which is ridiculous because it was it's called the Willamette Valley, which was formed by large floods at the end of the last ice age. That's a subject in its own right. But here we are, we're in the most fertile valley in the United States, and we're shipping out about 80% of what we grow here. And then we're bringing back in some of the stuff that we grew here from somewhere else. So, example, we grow lots of kale and collards here, lots of brassicas, but most of them get exported somewhere, either somewhere else in the United States or somewhere or abroad in some cases. And then we bring back in collards. So if I go to the store here, which is about 1.5 miles from here, and want to buy collards or kales or many other things, we can grow pretty much anything here apart from tropical fruits and citrus. We can't quite grow, but we can grow pretty much everything else. But if I go to the store here, to the produce section, as you call it over here, it's full of stuff from elsewhere that we could be growing here. You know, in fact, if there's ever anything local in the supermarkets here, there's a big sign, this is local. You know, it's like, well, what about all the rest, you know? So, you know, we're living a ridiculous, in most places, we're living a ridiculous life, which has no longevity in it, and doesn't make any sense. Oh, the other thing I wanted to mention, the main thoroughfare here is the 5 freeway. That pretty much comes up from Los Angeles right up into Canada. But it's like as if we as human beings had one artery in our body, because that's what it's like. It's like an artery, and all that food that's going out and coming in is going up and down the 5 freeway. Well, since I've lived here, which is I came in 2014, the 5 freeway has been closed completely twice. Luckily, it didn't last long. Both were due to severe snowstorms. But the reality is that, you know, again, we're relying on something that's not necessarily, you know, it's finite. I mean, there's all sorts of sort of different points of view on this particular thing I want to talk about, but it's thought that we have no more than 3 or 4 weeks food in any, you know, in any supermarket anywhere. Which is nothing, you know. So what did that do to me? So I started probably 5 or 6 years ago. I thought, blimey, I'm eating this pepper that I bought, and you know, people used to tell me, take the seeds out because they'll upset your stomach, you know. But then that's years back, which is not true. Well, you know, anything can upset anybody's stomach, but it's not the seeds per se. But there I am. I thought, bloody hell. In this pepper that I bought, seeds. If you take a typical bell pepper, you'll see what I'm talking about. Then I started to think, well, hang on a minute, what are these little things in tomatoes? You know, I like tomatoes, and I thought, I did a bit of research, and I thought, bloody hell, the seeds. And then I started to think, well, I can eat this tomato, and I can eat that bell pepper and lots of other things, and I can save the seeds. You know, why am I not saving the seeds? Why all these years I haven't saved seeds? So I started with those and many other things. The main point here is, and it's really important, you can save seeds and still eat. Save seeds and still eat the fruit or the vegetable, you know. So 6 years ago, saving seeds, and I ended up eventually with a long kitchen drawer. Probably he's probably got, oh yeah, maybe one of those long thin kitchen drawers. That was sort of my first dedicated storage of seeds. So yesterday, I've lost. I can't count. I know how many varieties we now have. We have 1,205 different varieties now. In 15. What I started using was to store them, because obviously a drawer wasn't any good anymore. I started buying ammunition, waterproof ammunition cases, which yeah, they are plastic, but they're waterproof. And I thought at least I can give that level of seeds and still eat the fruit or the. So, like I said, we've now got 1,205 varieties. I have no idea. I have no idea how many seeds there are. What I do know is this. So this year, I'm living in a place with about 2,000 square foot of garden. So I'm actually living in a garden, which is a nice thing. This is what I'm living in. It's a tiny home. I sleep up there. And on the other side, which is another loft, is the seed collection. So going back to what I was saying, I start collecting, in the drawer to start with. Then like I said, we've now got 1,205 varieties. I have no idea, because it was waterproof, and I carried on saving. And I'll go back to what I was going to say about this place. So there's about 2,000 square feet of gardens here. So this year I decided for the first time to count every seed that I saved. For me, it was a wonderful experience. Apart from it being very exciting, it's also very meditative, because you can't do it quickly. You can with big seeds, but you can't with small seeds. So at this point in time, as I'm standing here, so out of this 2,000 square foot garden of gardens, I'm still counting them, because we're still eating winter squash. Because winter squash is called winter squash because it keeps over winter. So the point is, let me get to the numbers. So we've now got 42,651 seeds that I've saved. That's this year, since basically late spring or summer of this. That's last year. I forget we're in 2024 now. So that's last year. That's out of a single 2,000 foot garden. So we absolutely. So at this point in time, as I'm standing here, so we do have a food crisis, but it's because we're shipping stuff all over the place. I mean, there's a number here that's quite widely shared, which says that fresh food, which comes to us via our supermarkets, by the time we bought it and cooked it hopefully and put it on our homes, it's travelled an average of 1,500 miles. That's insanity, and it's all driven by greed-filled people who are running our societies and running our societies into the ground unless we stop them. To me, an average of 1,500 miles. That's insanity. Talking earlier, I mean, I've learned so much from what I've read of what the indigenous peoples have done, over years with seeds. I mean, it's very humbling, and I want to point out, recommend a particular. There's a couple of them actually, but there's a particular kind of planting. It's called Three Sisters, and that's very much practiced throughout an average of 1,500 miles. Planting squash, corn, and beans together. And what happens, I've done this several times now over the years. What happens is there's one thing I would say. I've found that it's better to plant the corn first and let it grow a little. Otherwise, you end up with the corn being smothered, or you can. So what happens is the corn grows. Obviously, as we all know, corn grows pretty tall. The beans then start to climb up the corn. And of course, there's two kinds of beans. Somebody just commented and reminded me. There's bush beans and what I call vining beans, or pole beans, POLE. It's the best kind to use in Three Sisters is pole beans. That doesn't mean you can't use bush, but the pole beans will climb up. You'll see them; they'll climb up the corn. Squash, corn, squash. relative to use, is that they shade the ground. They help to keep things cool when it's hot. And we get very hot summers here in Oregon. We it's not uncommon, unfortunately, in some cases, to go 3 or 4 months without any rain or any precipitation of any kind. So the large leaves from the squash benefit the whole situation by shading the ground so it doesn't dry out too quickly. So what we end up with at the end when we eventually harvest the squash, by the way, I should come back on that for a minute. Winter squash is I like all squash, but winter squash is particularly good to grow because the name, it's called winter squash because you can harvest the squash in, like, say, October, November, and providing you store it well, it should last until May or June of the following year. Winter squash typically has much tougher skin than summer squash. Summer squashes are things like zucchinis and yellow squash. They've all got the place though. But so winter squash is great. I mean, obviously corn, once you let corn dry and beans dry, they also last a long time. They'll outlast the winter squash. Of course, the other good thing is you can get, when you do come to cook the winter squash, you get the seeds out of the squash. I've got a couple here. I mean, so this was a sorry, yeah, this was a what's called a buttercup squash, which is a quite a large. I don't know if that's clear. Let me hold it up there. No, that's better. Yeah, so that's a squash seed from squash that we grew here. That was one squash, and we got 125 seeds from it. So I always think about another point about seeds, and I saved the squash when I cook I saved the seeds when I cook the squash. So in other words, I cut the squash usually in half, save the seeds, just put them in water till they're clean, basically. And the main thing with seeds, which is really important, is to dry them before you store them. We do make our own seed packets, by the way, out of ordinary pieces of paper. So I mean, what I'm trying to say here, and I hope I've said in some sort of lucid way, is save seeds. It's easy. And the way I did it, I started with the easiest of all, which is beans, squash. I mentioned that already. These are large seeds. Even pepper seeds are pretty easy, They're not that big, but they're easy to get. Some seeds are harder, like things like lettuce and, where the seeds are very small. Carrots is another. But again, as I shared a little bit earlier, counting seeds and manipulating seeds is very restful to me and very spiritual too. So as time went by, the seed collection got bigger. I mentioned that a transition to one waterproof ammunition box. We now have 15 waterproof ammunition boxes here where I am. We also have, I started a seed exchange in Eugene itself for those who are ever in and around this area. It's a lovely little business called Eugene Backyard Farmer. And inside the premises there are 3 or 4 boxes at any one time with something between 150 to 200 packets of seed in them. And that's an ongoing thing. And we're at the point now where we're getting probably twice as many seeds back as we're giving out. The whole idea is take the seeds, grow them, bring us some of the seeds back. And there's no, it's an honor system, so there's no tracking for that sort of thing. So yeah, I'm just looking at the time here. So, and let me talk for a minute about the Cascadia Seed Guild. So Cascadia is basically the Pacific Northwest of the United States, with British Columbia, Canada, and part of Northern California. So last year there was a tour organized with a young man called Joe Brewer, who's very well known in regenerative circles worldwide. And he came through here and he visited Eugene and 13 other places. This was over basically over October last year. And, you know, I was a bit worried that after he'd come and gone, that maybe the fire that had been ignited whilst he was on the tour would fade, but it hasn't. If anything, it's got stronger. And I was approached because of, by happy coincidence, which is what it is, I was approached to steward the Cascadia Seed Guild. This initiative is emerging. I mean, there's obvious parts to it, like saving seeds and exchanging them. But something came to me the other day, a bit like when I stepped off I was talking earlier, I stepped off the ferry onto Waiheke Island. I woke up and this idea just came into my head. We need to create emergency seed banks. Now, here in Cascadia, we are particularly under threat. Sounds a bit negative, but it's a scientific fact that there is this thing called the Cascadia subduction, which is where the Pacific plate, the Juan de Fuca plate, which is the one that's basically under the ocean, under the Pacific, is being subducted under the Pacific plate, which is the landmass basically. And I've been here now since 2014, and I've never felt an earthquake. And that sounds like good news, but it's actually not. What it means is that the pressure from the Juan de Fuca plate under the Pacific plate is building. And there was when scientists realized what was going on, they back in, I think, probably the early 2000s, they became very aware that there'd been a massive earthquake here in 1700, in January 1700. And the reason they found that out is that there was a tidal wave found in Japan, and they couldn't figure out why, because there'd been no earthquake. Then they realized it was the wave from the Pacific from here. And at that time, I just want you to think about this. Let's say just go up a ladder to a height of 6 feet, then jump down and see what it feels like. And the reason I say that is that last time it happened, the landmass here dropped 6 feet. Now, if you imagine the whole of the Pacific Northwest of the United States, British Columbia, Canada, and Northern California dropping 6 feet, you can get some idea of what's going to happen. And we can't stop it. It's going to happen. And the scientists say from historical records that it's every 300 to 500 years. And it's 1700 is over 300 years ago. So anyway, it came to me, I thought, I'll go back and repeat what I was saying. We need emergency seed banks. You know, we need at least 4 of them. And it may take a couple of years to get them. I've already got, because of everything I've gone through with permaculture, I actually have a formula, a spreadsheet where I know exactly what we need to create those seed banks. And they're gonna cost somewhere around, including administration, somewhere around probably $120,000 a year. And we'll get great advantages from them because we'll be constantly building up the seed supply, so we'll be able to extend those emergency seed shelters elsewhere, and they'll be critical. And here's the good news about annuals. So there's 2 kinds of plants basically. There's one called annuals, which means you have to plant the seed every year. Hemp is an annual. Many other plants are. And then there are perennials, and perennials are plants that grow multi-years. You know, fruit trees are a classic example of perennials. Once they're established and producing fruit, they'll carry on. They may have some years where there's less fruit. But the beauty of annuals, which tends to get a bad rap, is you can have food, depending on where you are. I can plant annual seeds here and I'll have food in 3 months. So it's a very fast, you know, producing kind of plant. And then the other thing is, there's another thing that I'll mention here, because you may hear it mentioned. People will say, oh no, my plants have gone to seed. That's what they're bloody there for. Sorry, I swore there. They're there to produce seeds, and then before they go to seed, there's all these beautiful flowers on them. little yellow and white flowers that the pollinators really like. You know, there's nothing wrong with letting plants go to seed. And the other myth that gets propagated is, well, you can't, once they've gone to seed, you can't eat the leaves anymore. That's rubbish. You know, they may taste a little different, but you can eat them. And then another thing, sorry, I'm getting worked up here. Leaves with holes in them, there's nothing wrong with them. Yet we go to Albertsons or Kroger or Safeway, and there's all these beautiful plants. You know, they're just so beautiful and perfect. You imagine how much gets thrown away to get us to those perfect leaves. That's not normal. If I ever had in any of my gardens, if I ever had a year where the leaves were perfect, I'd be a little bit bloody frightened because we wouldn't have any insects anymore. And if we don't have any insects anymore, we don't have anything anymore. Anyway, it's coming up to 12:29, and I've got. Sorry, I got a little bit over enthusiastic there, but it's a wonderful thing. I'm a 75-year-old great grandfather now, so I have a great interest in the future. And I just wanted to read something that I'd saved here. I think. Oh yeah, no, it's gone. Basically, what it was something saying, you know, we're all of our lives we're borrowing what we have from our children's future. And if we really thought through that, I'm not saying the people here, I'm just talking generally as a society, we thought through that, we'd absolutely we'd stop damaging our mother Earth, and we'd think about, and there's a wonderful expression, isn't there, which is very powerful: 7 generations hence. And that's how my mind works. Anyway, it's 12:30. Thank you for everybody that listened. And Sean, do we know if Rob is here yet?
Yes, I believe he is.
Good.
And thank you so much, Mike. That is Mike with Incredible Edible Eugene and the Cascaded Sea Guild. Mike is also the executive director of Planet the Dragonfly, our permaculture guild. Mike, thank you much. And let's find Rob. Where you at, Rob? And Rob is Planet the Dragonfly, Washington. Rob, come on in.
Hi. So thank you for this opportunity to speak again. I really appreciate what everybody's doing and sharing what they have with others. And that's how we grow, right? Because simple thoughts heard out loud can shift the course of humanity. You know, we just had a fire convergence. And to me, fire is what builds the desire, and so that we can inspire others. And if we are doing things in a different way than what everybody else is, we're either going to be seen as the crazy ones, or we're going to be seen as a way shower or a pathway provider, or somebody who's bringing awareness of options that have not yet been advertised to us by idols over television programming to the masses. And we have to see that some of the things that we're supporting in the world that we live in right now and today aren't natural. And Mike was just talking about how the localization of food is what's natural. And when we're shipping everything, it seems, from one side of the world to the other side of the world, and then complaining about a carbon footprint, we should recognize how our choices are affecting what's being supported. Do we gather our supplies, our day-to-day supplies, from the grocery store, you know, in a public domain supermarket? Or do we gather our supplies from the source, you know, grocery stores, or this source, gathering from this source? I guess it sounds phonetically similar enough that we don't bother supporting, or we don't mind supporting that which isn't natural. But when we gather at the source for free, we start to build an abundance locally that we can share easily. And like what Mike was saying, I went to Earth Day event a few years ago, and I was talking with some of the educators from from Central Washington University, and they guide a lot of the trends in what's being done with agriculture. And I talked with them. I said, we're poisoning the environment to kill the bugs that want to eat the food. And then we're also creating foods that the bugs don't want to eat. If a bug doesn't want to eat honestly, if a bug doesn't want to eat the food, I believe that there's a divine intelligence within that insect that can't be advertised into consuming something that isn't good for them. So one of the things they were talking about is, we talk about plastic waste, but yet one of the solutions that the universities are coming up with is to put a bag, a little plastic bag on every apple as it's growing. And I said, wow, isn't the bag preventing the sun from actually nourishing the fruit? And they said, well, yeah. So the first time we grew them, we didn't take the bags off until we were ready to harvest them, and the apples had no color. The peels had no color. And one of the things I've recognized too locally is we have some packaging warehouses here that I can pick up thousands of pounds of apples or pears or cherries or all sorts of products that aren't good enough for the shelf at the grocery store. And so the apples are a little too big or a little too small, or they have a blemish. But when I go to the grocery store, they're $3 a pound or more. Yet I'm picking up 3,000 pounds in the back of my truck to be used in composting. And I can't legally sell them. I can't legally even give them away as an edible product. But this is the amount of waste that we're dealing with, and this is in one area. This is I'm in the Yakima Valley here in Central Washington, and I'm working here at the apocalyptic ashram Hawks Haven, and this is a model of transformation of the landscape and also of the individual. I use permaculture for the basis of the landscape design. And the last few days has been fantastic. And I have some videos on my YouTube channel to show some of the spring melt that we're experiencing, and features that have never filled up before filled up, and they were overflowing their boundaries. And so I was able to divert that water onto areas farther away from those valleys. Luckily, my old backhoe, she wasn't afraid of the cold and ice and snow and everything. So helped me quite a bit with the excavation. Saving seeds, something that Michael also touched on. I mentioned last time I spoke here that we can count the apples in a seed, and we might count 4 or 6 apples in that seed. But when that seed is dried and placed into soil, given some water, the conditions in which it can grow, there's no way to count the number of apples in that seed. It's infinite. And that's the beauty of what nature provides to us. And in nature, everything is raw. And so I call it a natural raw path of healing, health, happiness, peace, and abundance that we're seeking here with the individuals. And we use yoga and permaculture as the foundation principles to that. The awareness of now and the awareness of how, yoga was originally learned by watching nature. That's why so many of the asanas are named after animals or expressions that you're going to see in nature. Nature can't be advertised away from what is natural, right? And that's where the beaver who builds the healthy, hydrated landscapes where only erosion was present before. A cataclysmic event might bring land transformation changes in ways that we didn't anticipate. And when water starts flowing and rushing in a way that is destructive, that's when the beaver shows up. And the beaver introduces the meander to the erosion. He builds a dam and works his way like a wave pattern across the landscape to hold water to the land and to spread it out and to let it soak in and to create features that weren't existing that slow the water down. And when this happens, everyone thrives. We're not waiting for FedEx or UPS to deliver a case of water from a diesel-powered truck. We're catching the water as it falls from the sky and keeping it where it has fallen, as close as possible. The conservation districts that are supported by the government and the taxation of the people have been expediting the water from the mountains to the oceans for a long time. And I've been to some of their meetings, and I tried to remind them that that's not conservation of water. that's the opposite of that. But they're kind of set in their ways, it seems, in certain ways. And so until we have many voices, each expressing what we want to happen, there's just the one little person over in the corner isn't making much of a wave. So permaculture is the basis of our of localization. And in localization, for two of the primary things in our life are food and our authority. Right now we have somebody somewhere else dictating a lot of things in our life. And in that, we don't find efficiency or accountability or transparency or affordability. It seems we have a lot of middlemen wasting the resources that could be placed directly on the solutions of the problems. We have many people acting like Chicken Little, and we have a lot of problems in the world that a lot of awareness is being created of. Luckily, there are solutions to the problems we face. They're just not yet popular. And that's what I'm trying to do with my YouTube channel called Free Will. If just 2 words, Free Will. And if you wanted to do a search on, if you typed in Free Will and Food Fight with the Goats, Hunger is for Profit, there's about a 40-minute video I made of building compost with all of the foods that should have been much cheaper at the grocery store so that they wouldn't have started rotting on the shelf. We've got a constant revolving door of foods coming from 1,500 miles away that are being processed before they're actually ripe, so that way they can ripen en route. Instead of ripening by the root, R-O-O-T, they're ripening en route, R-O-U-T-E, right? So we're using things that are phonetically similar, but we're not doing it with what is natural. And so when they're ripening en route, instead of by the root, they're rotting on the shelves. And when they rot on the shelves, they are not the prized produce. So people aren't going to buy that. And so they're quickly pulled from the shelf and they're put in a box or in a dumpster out back. So some of my friends and I, we pick up from these places and we feed animals, or we feed the soil, and we can't sell it or be offering it to other people because it is considered trash. But a lot of it I eat from. I mean, these things they're just not perfect anymore. You get that was the other thing. We're packaging our things in convenience. So we get 10 oranges from a bag, right? But if one of those oranges goes bad, they throw away the whole bag. We say one bad apple doesn't destroy the orchard. But when that bad apple is left within it, it does. You know, it creates rot and it creates infestations of bugs. And we're doing things that aren't natural. And so we're suffering things because of that. When we align with nature and the divine design that the mother provides the elements for, and the father provides the space and time to exist within, we have a coming together of intention and action and resources to manifest growth, oneness, and a divine accordance with everyone everywhere. When we recognize that the other aspect of that localization is in authority, we stop looking for someone somewhere else to be the boss of us right here and right now. I have people here, even locally, that are trying to regulate me, yet they don't know what I'm doing. They don't hold the education or the intelligence of how nature works. They're only aware of the laws that have been made by somebody somewhere else, often lobbied by insurance companies and corporations for the benefit of their bottom dollar, right? How many digits can be stacked away in a bank account? Some of the things that we talk about with permaculture is the diversity in which our landscapes can be growing in. And when we start to see an insect problem, we have to recognize the solution. And the solution is to usually to plant plants that invite the predators to the pests. And there are other ways that we can use companion planting to keep pests away. You know, we can spray DDT and Roundup type poisons in our environment, intending to kill the mosquitoes or the wasp or the things that we don't want swimming or flying around us at a picnic at our house. But we can also plant mint and lavender and marigold and all sorts of smelly plants like rosemary. And I'm sure somebody else with even more knowledge and fluidity of naming the diversity that can can invite in the predators or keep away pests is here and available to us. And maybe that'll be shared a little bit later. I'm touching base on a lot of topics here. And one of them is when I started off with the fire is building a desire to inspire. And one of the things that we can do with that is become that mentor in our local communities that helps people recognize their abilities to grow and to expand and support the things that will create a better tomorrow. And when we do that, we can really initiate change. You know, it's like a pebble thrown into a still pond. The ripples reach in all directions. I've been lucky. I've had some really quality mentors in my life. And one gentleman in particular, he has accomplished a lot. I mean, just more than you think any like 70-year-old guy could do, you know, in a lifetime of pictures and stories that you just tell for hours, days, right? And I asked him, I said, how have you done so much? Because I'm wow. I mean, I thought that I was doing a lot, but no, thank you. How do you do so much? And he says, well, I just work an hour a day. And I said, oh, bull, bull. That does not get what you've accomplished done. And he says, well, all right. So I picked the 3 or 4 things that I think are most important, on the top of my to-do list. And I try to give each one of those an hour a day. And, you know, and that keeps me, so I'm not bored with any one thing, but that hour a day at the end of a month, I've put close to 30 hours towards a project. And when you put 30 hours towards a project, there's quite a bit that can get done. And being that we have 12 of those months every year, there's quite a bit you can accomplish. And he says it doesn't hurt that if after you've put your hour in and you're still motivated towards it, that hour turns into 3 or 10 or 12, right? You know, take a little break, take a little snack, maybe even take a little nap if you want. Because somebody somewhere else isn't telling you what to do. You know what to do best with your life. And if you don't know what is best to do with your life, there are places that you can go and people will tell you exactly what to do, when to do, and how to do it. But to assume that everybody needs that level of observation or supervision is wrong. And that's where in politics we have the left versus the right, and we have the liberals versus the conservatives, and we have the up versus the down, and we have Coke versus Pepsi, and we have Chevy versus Ford, and we have one team versus the other team, and we have all of these sources of division, right? And one team is voting to push their will on another team all the time. And so the other team gets upset because they're being forced to support things that they don't believe in. And then 4 years goes by, and then the other team gets in control, and then they use their voting to push their will on other people. And then those people are upset that they're being forced to support the things that they don't want to support. By show of hands, who voluntarily supports war? Who is wanting the lack of accountability and transparency and efficiency that's presented in the current leadership that we have across the globe? You know, and there's some people that are doing things right, but it seems like the few. And then there becomes a military action that takes them out of power. For too long, we've seen this. But yet we don't stand up. We don't stand together. We don't unify. And one thing that I believe that we can unify under is that we have to realize that in politics, there's really only two sides of the coin. You believe in self-ownership and a non-aggression principle because you recognize the self-ownership in other people. And that the way that we should be supporting things is by our voluntary effort in the things that we feel are most important for us to support. There is another political belief, though. There's a belief, and we'll call that statism, that somebody somewhere else has the right to dictate and rule over your life, to spend the product of your labor. And when we're